You are now tuning into the Resilient Podcast. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Aurelius, and welcome to episode 23 of the Resilient Podcast. Today, I have a special guest in the studio, Cornelius Minor. Cornelius is someone who I met actually last year at our office space in Brooklyn. And, I always used to look at this room filled with Funko Pops, as you can see here in the background for those that are watching on YouTube, and books. And, I saw some like-minded stuff, some WWE action figures in the room as well too. And I was like, I gotta find out who this guy is or this person is. And I used to see Cornelius in passing from time to time, walking in with his bike, his helmet on, and I didn't know that he was the person who owned this room. When I finally had a conversation with him, and Cornelius, you probably remember this conversation last year. It was a very interesting conversation. I found out that he's an educator. I found out that he's a cyclist as well too. And Cornelius, like I said, when I mentioned the educator part, he's been an educator for a very, very long time. So this is a long time coming. I wanted to, when I started the podcast, one of the first people that I thought about was actually having Cornelius on the podcast, and he's finally here. So, today we're going to discuss dynamic, the word dynamic. And Cornelius, thank you for being part of this episode.
Oh, it's an absolute thrill to be here, man.
It's Black History Month, so we're going to talk a little bit about Black history. We're going to talk about your background. We're going to talk about all the stuff that you got going on. I wanted to ask you, Cornelius, what does the word dynamic actually mean to you? Like in this season of your life right now, what does it mean to you?
Oh man, Rob, like I think about this all the time. I mean, especially in a month like this one, especially in a time like this one, right? We're celebrating Black History Month.
Yes.
While we are looking at an executive administration that is attempting to limit the study of history, while we're working with people in this country who don't see the value of honoring people who are different than them, who don't see the value of building communities that are full of people who understand each other, right? And so this idea dynamic for me really comes from the idea that the only thing constant in life is change, right? And political seasons change, people change, circumstances change. And when I think about your theme, resilience, one of the ways that people can show up is to be dynamic, to always be learning, to always be considering context, to always be considering who is in front of me, what's the environment, what are the needs here, who are the different people here, how can I best contribute, bring my skills, my talents, my outlook to a given situation to make it better for everybody. And so that idea of dynamic for me, especially at this time in my life, I'm changing, I'm, in my mid 40s and I'm learning things finally now that I wish I would have known earlier.
Evolving.
Exactly. And so how do I live in a way that honors the mistakes that I've made, that does repair to any harm that I've made, but then that also moves forward, understanding that I can live based on what I've learned, and I can live based on what I am learning. I hope as a person that the guy you see right now is better than the guy you saw yesterday.
I like that.
Right? And to really embody that is to be dynamic. Yeah.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
And Cornelius, that's exactly how I feel about myself.
Yeah.
We've heard this before. We've heard people say in the past, I wish I knew this before. I wish I was different. And the thing is, in life, it's all about evolving. It's all about adapting. It's all about learning. Learning is a everyday experience. Yeah. I always tell people that, I've had people tell me in the past, oh, that's not true. And I'm like, we learn something new every day.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we should.
Yeah.
We should.
Yeah.
And we should learn and apply. right? Like, because a
Exactly.
lot of people learn, but they don't apply,
Exactly.
right? So if I
The,
learn,
the applying part is very serious,
Yeah.
but that's the thing. It's like, even if,
Yeah.
like you said, and we should, but I even if people don't think they're learning something, they're learning something.
Yeah.
And this is something that I share with everyone. I've said this to you
Yeah.
before, numbers of times. I've said this to the people that I work with. I take a lot of pride in learning from everyone. I learn from kids.
Yeah.
I learn from
No, that's
babies.
really cool.
And people are like, how can you learn from a baby? Baby doesn't even communicate. I'm like, the signs, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, I have a niece now,
Mhm.
she's about to be a year old next month. And just the way she communicates with me, her mom, and stuff like that, like that to me is inspiring. I learn from the elderly. I love listening to the elderly. One of the things that I know that you and I automatically had a lot in common was, I remember you one time sharing a story with me about your grandmother.
Yeah.
And my grandmother, obviously, there's no secret about this. She is the most inspirational person that I've ever met.
Wow.
And my grandmother is the reason why I am the way that I am. And I try to be the person that I am every day. And I like how you said that, you want to be better than the guy from yesterday. And that's the thing with me. I noticed that when I started this podcast, one of the things that I do is I tend to look into the mirror a few times a week.
Okay.
Not just when I'm brushing my teeth, or combing my hair, but
Yeah.
also to just look in the mirror to see, do I like the person that I see?
Wow.
Because a few years ago, I was in a relationship, and this is about evolving and learning, and like you said, applying.
Yeah.
I was in a relationship with someone who taught me a lot.
Wow.
And I kind of felt like the whole entire relationship for 2 years, she was holding the mirror and showing me who I was.
Wow.
And sometimes I've heard that expression before. You probably heard it before too.
Absolutely.
Sometimes people hold a mirror for you.
Yeah.
Like the entire time that you know them, whether it's a relationship, romantically, or a friendship, they're just holding up that mirror.
Yeah.
And you're talking to them, and all they're doing is holding up that mirror.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you either like what you see in that mirror or you don't. And I remember that with that mirror just standing there, it showed me so much of the things that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
And, I was already in therapy, and I immediately was like, you know what, I need to start making some changes.
Absolutely. And again, that's dynamic, right? To say, here's a situation that I like maybe and don't love, or here's a situation that I don't like. And then to realize that as humans, we have agency. That like, I can say, here's the thing that I don't like about myself, but here are all the things I can do to change it.
Exactly.
Like, and one of the things that I'm growing to appreciate is that change can be like, we often think about big changes, but like I'm thinking about like, what are the little things that I do every day that can have a significant impact on the relationships, the quality of my relationships, on the quality of my work, on how I like interact or engage with other folks. Yeah, so that's major. Yeah.
So it leads me to my second question.
Yeah.
You have had a dynamic career, and as an educator, advocate, a writer, and even a cycling enthusiast. So as you prepare for the season of cycling, what has that journey taught you about resilience and reinvention?
Oh my goodness. And it's interesting, right? Because I've always been an athlete. I love playing sports as a middle schooler. Like I even remember my elementary school field day. Like I played sports in high school. I've always been an athlete. But like you said, like I never really saw myself as somebody who was excellent. I would always look around the field and I'm like, oh, that kid is better than me. Or that person is faster than me. Or that person can like score more goals than me. My confidence wasn't what it needed to be. And I've always enjoyed sports, but I would let, other people overshadow my enjoyment of the game. Or I would let my obsession with winning or my obsession with doing well overshadow how much fun I was actually having. And so during the pandemic, I came back to cycling because it was always something that I loved. And at that time, I was like my early 40s, but I came back to cycling and I was like, I'm just going to do it for the fun. I'm going to just do it because I love it. Every time I get on the bike, I feel great. Like after a big ride, I'm tired, I'm sweating, and I just like, I feel better. Like it's just so great. And so just eliminating that desire to, I guess, compete or to compare myself to others and really holding myself accountable to my own enjoyment and to my own health just became such a powerful thing. And I realized, and here's what was funny, the more I leaned into the fun, the better I actually did.
Good.
And so I would go out to events and people would be like, man, you're amazing. And I'd be like, I'm just out here because I enjoy it, or I would go out biking with my kids, and it was just like so much fun. And so then I started making friends in the community. And so the cycling community here in New York City is incredible. There's lots of just like powerful, thoughtful, creative people. And I'm really just into, our environment is a thing right now. And so not using cars is really important to me, and that I can move around using methods that are good for the planet, that are good for our city. I think about that. Like I'm thinking about independence. Like when I cycle with my daughters, I'm really into this idea of independence, that you can be the kind of person who doesn't have to rely on anybody to get from point A to point B. And that you could do this in ways that are healthy for you, ways that like help your body, and ways that help our community. And so I'm really into connecting with other people who are into like the environment. I'm really into connecting with other people who want to really like enjoy what our city has to offer. Every time I'm on a bike, I meet people. You stop at a stoplight, there's a cyclist next to you, or you stop at a corner and there's a guy at the corner store selling flowers. And so being able to know my community from two wheels is a really, really like beautiful way to know the community. So it's something I love. I've connected with lots of folks at Bike New York. I've connected with lots of folks at the bike shop where I go, so I'll go into the bike shop to oil my chain or to fix a flat, and I'll spend 30 minutes, talking to the people in the bike shop, but I think my love of cycling is connected specifically to my love of community. Anything that brings people together in productive ways can be a radical force for change, and so when I look at the cycling community and I see everything that people are doing, so people aren't just cyclists, people are parents, right? People aren't just cyclists, people are community activists, right? People aren't just cyclists, they're educators. And so looking at all these people who we all have this thing in common is, again, a really beautiful thing.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's the way I think about life as well too. I'm all about community.
Yeah.
I did mention the writing part about you, that you're a writer. So I wanted to ask you, you're writing again.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that. But I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to return to the page, and what message do you hope people could take away from your current work?
Wow. I started writing when I was young, I think because I was angry. I would look around the world and I would see things that weren't right. Or I would see things that weren't going well for specific communities of people. So I would look around and I would see how Black and brown students often didn't get, the things that other students had. And that would anger me. And so I would want to bring that to the page so that people would know, so that we could kind of figure out what we're going to do about it. Or I would look around and I would see, that folks with disabilities didn't have the access that they needed to thrive, in certain situations, in certain scenarios. And so that would anger me. And so I would write, or I would look around and I would see how, girls and women were underserved in specific communities, and that would anger me. Or I would see how, LGBTQIA people didn't have the access that they need. I would look around and all these things would anger me. And so that's what brought me to the pen initially, just kind of like working out that anger and my desire for real community connection, my desire for peace, really is what drove my pen earlier in my career. And so I would come and I would just really think about, what can I put into the world that's going to support people? What can I put into the world that's going to help people to have the access they need? What can I put into the world that will connect people to the resources that they need? So those were my questions before. But, as I'm maturing, there's still that anger there, but I think that anger now has a companion. There's still the anger, but I'm writing to explore and to discover who I am. As I'm growing, again, back to this idea of dynamic, as I'm growing, I'm realizing that I don't always have to, respond to things, right? That I can write to create ecosystems where things are as I dream them, right? I can write to create, classroom spaces or neighborhood spaces where things are as people desire them to be. And so where I think early in my career, I really wrote to disrupt the things that were hurting people, I think now I am writing to create the things that people dream about.
Wow.
And so that's been really exciting for me, this idea of writing as creation. I even connected to the idea of resilience. I think about, I'm West African, and, we tell a lot of stories in my family. And there's a story of this man who lived by a river. And he lived by the river, and everybody in his community thought that he was a hero because he would see sometimes kids in the river and they were like drowning, and he would jump in the river and save them.
Wow.
And so almost every day there would be 2 or 3 kids that he would see them in the river and they'd be struggling to swim or drowning, and he would jump in the river and save them. And so everybody in the community were like, yo, you're a hero. Like, we need you in this community. You're like the strongest guy we have in this community. But never did that guy think, let me walk up the river to see why the kids are falling in, right? Because I don't have to jump in and save them every day if I walk up and see why they're falling in. If I address the reason why they're falling in, those kids don't have to be resilient. Rather, we can have a peaceful community. And so everybody was praising the resilience of the kids, the resilience of this man, but let's be creative, and that's one of the things that I think about. Like, if I am creative in communities, then I can create ecosystems where people don't have to be resilient, right? Because resilience, I think, is a last minute thing, right? That resilience is a good thing to have, but it's an emergency fix, right? If I can create a world where people don't have to be resilient, a world that is just, a world that is fair, a world that sees people for who they are, right? If I can do that, you don't have to be resilient every day. To put you in a world where you have to be resilient every day,
very challenging,
isn't a just world. But to say, how can I look at this world and create an ecosystem that supports people? So how can I look at this river and create a river where people aren't falling in every day, right? So if I'm jumping in every day to save the kids, to be a hero, and the kids are being resilient, struggling to swim, that's one thing, and we can praise them. But to walk up the river and be like, why are they falling in the first place? Let me fix that. That way nobody even has to be resilient, and so I'm often thinking about, how do I use my writing again to create? I think for early in my career, a lot of my writing was like, yes, to react, to respond. But now I'm like, I want to really kind of create ecosystems where people have what they need.
Yeah, that's why I'm so big on social impact, because like you mentioned, the writing came from the anger that you had, the frustration. There was certain injustices and things that you weren't happy about. So I'm glad that you chose writing, journaling as, because everybody deals with things differently. When I, started to realize what was right and wrong, mainly like in junior high school, and then in high school, I started advocating for the first time in my life, because I didn't have the best childhood. I was raised, unfortunately, in an environment where my opinion never mattered. And we talked about this one time. Unfortunately, as much as I love my family, because of the way that they were brought up, there was never a voice of reasoning. There was never a voice of sense, of awareness, or whatever the case may be. Everything was just always justified. Everything was just always normalized. And when I started to realize, one of the first things I started to realize was how it was normalized, and not just in my family, but my surroundings, that women didn't have so much of a say so. When I started to stand up for women, and I started to stand up for little girls, I got criticized for that. Oh, what are you, a female? Are you a woman? Are you sassy, or this and this and this? You want to be a woman? And I used to tell people, no, I don't have to be a woman to defend women. And I've always been an advocate. And I think it came a lot from how I saw my mom being treated when I was younger, how my grandmother was treated. I shared this story once, but my grandmother came from the Dominican Republic to this country, not just so much to chase the American dream, but to also get away from the regime of a dictator that was back home in the Dominican Republic. And he wanted to torture my grandmother. Based upon the fact, because my grandmother used to go to the, they call it the frontera, which is like the division between Haiti and DR. And she would feed the Haitians. She would supply them with food. She would supply them with clothes and stuff like that. And those people at the actual, front, they would look at her and they would be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And she's like, because when those folks try to come over here, you guys torture them, you burn them, you skin them, you kill them, and they don't make it back home. They don't make it back to the other side. They literally came to this side to get something to bring back to provide for their family. and they shouldn't be executed or anything. We should be welcoming them. We should be providing for them. And that's something that I learned from my grandmother at a young age, to provide. I think it's one of the reasons why I started my one of my businesses, ARCG Media, where I started servicing people, and people say, why do you care so much about service? And I was like, because as humans, we're here to service. We're here to provide. We would want a service and people to provide to us back, reciprocation. And we may not necessarily get that all the time, but my grandmother, she always told me that no matter what you have, no matter how much, very little you may have, give what you can. And, I took that to heart. And when I heard about her story, how she, why she earned her nickname Mamasa, which is mom of all mothers, is because everybody looked at her as a mom.
Wow.
She was a mom, not just to the people in the village of the Dominican Republic where she lived, but she was a mother to these Haitians.
Wow.
And, I always used to tell my mom, her name is Aura. Well, why do people call her Mamasa? And she goes, Mamasa is because she earned that title. And when I found out what she had to go through to become that person, the resilience that she had to overcome, and the adversity and everything, it motivated me. Absolutely. And from that point, Cornelius, I not just started advocating for women, but I started advocating for everyone, started advocating for children, started advocating for everyone else. That's one of the reasons why I got really big with the social impact. And then I started working with Global Citizen. So, your way of how you express yourself and how you wanted to make the change and how you wanted to see the change, you started writing. I started advocating, and I started going out and being part of all these functions and all these type of things. And, sometimes people would say to me, be careful, don't go out there protesting, don't go out there marching, because, sometimes it can become dangerous. And I'm like, look, I want my voice to be heard. I'm part of the 8 billion people that exist in this world. There's going to be a group of people that are not going to want to listen to what I have to say or endorse or support what I say. But there's also a group out there of people that actually will support and defend.
And I just really appreciate that story of your grandmother. We're in, it's uncanny how history repeats itself, right? That we're in, in this very moment as we sit here kind of discussing this, we can take lessons from your grandmother and apply them to today's context.
Yes.
We are, again, we find ourselves in this moment where folks who have power have decided that certain people deserve less, right? And so that you are honoring your grandmother's legacy by stepping into that tradition where you're saying, you know what, I'm going to use every platform I have, every resource I have to support people who don't have the things that I have, and so, and that's the world that I imagine, that folks are using their creativity to uplift others, that in this, it sounds so simple, when we talk about it. And it really is simple in execution to just really ask oneself, what do I have and how can I use that thing to support somebody else? That you use your creativity, that you use your voice to support other folks. It doesn't require, giving millions of dollars. It just requires you to be creative, which you already are. And so I hope that people who are listening to this podcast are thinking the same thing. What is it that I bring to the table and how can I use that, in service of other folks?
Yeah, of course. We're talking about history, but before I get into that, I wanted to mention something because you just brought up a good point. I remember a few years ago, people, as we're growing, people sometimes ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you aspire to be? Aspire was a word, because I always remembered hearing the word inspire when I was younger, but not inspire. And when I first heard that word aspire, someone had asked me a long time ago, what do you aspire to be one day? And I remember one time, I said to people, look, I definitely want to be a motivational speaker. Podcast was not in the mix, because even at the time, when people asked me this, in the early 2000s, podcast didn't exist yet, and there was just radio shows and stuff like that, but the podcasting world wasn't a thing yet. And one of the things I told someone one day, just based upon of what I used to look at, I used to watch Oprah, I used to watch all these other folks with the philanthropy aspect of stuff. And I remember one time, not to bash this old friend of mine, his name is Andre, he almost kind of criticized me because when I had said that I aspired to be a philanthropist, his response automatically was, you don't have money. You're not a billionaire. You're not wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Cornelius, all it takes is sometimes
Yeah.
to dig deep into something
Yeah.
and find out how something became and
Yeah.
how something began. What was the
Yeah.
beginning of it? How did it start?
Yeah.
And when I look deep into philanthropy, you know how philanthropy started?
How's that?
Started in churches.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
You know,
Yeah.
people were bringing clothes.
Yeah.
People were bringing food, like my
Yeah.
grandmother did.
Yeah.
When I told people that I believed that my grandmother was a philanthropist, which she was.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because I'll tell you a quick story. It's very emotional when I think about it. When my grandmother passed away, we had folks calling to give the condolences.
Yeah.
We had a phone call from the Dominican Republic, and you know, my family's a mess because my grandmother's death wasn't the easiest. She passed away from dementia, 4-year battle.
Mm-hmm.
And we received a phone call from a folk out in the Dominican Republic,
Yeah.
and they were giving their condolences. And my family, my mom precisely, was asking, "Thank you. You know, how did you know her?" During the time that my grandmother had the dementia before she landed in the hospital, she was always sending out boxes and boxes to people back home. And you know that a lot of people from the Caribbean, this is what they do. They just send boxes,
Yeah.
you know, these big boxes,
Yeah.
right? That they just send with food, clothes,
food,
everything. Long story short, lady tells my mom, and you know, I remember when I first heard this because my mom cried. And when my mom told me the story, I cried too.
Wow.
She said to me that even with the dementia, my grandmother used to do this thing where we lived in this neighborhood, and people would watch my grandmother in the street picking stuff or sometimes grabbing stuff and taking it home.
Yeah.
And the folks would come back to my family and be like, "Hey, I saw your mom, you know, digging through the garbage. I saw your mom doing this. I saw your mom doing that. Or I saw your mom taking something from somewhere." And my grandmother would get scolded by the family. "Mom, what are you doing? What are you doing picking in garbage?" Turns out that before my grandmother went to the hospital, these boxes, she was still sending them to DR.
Wow.
And what she was doing was and I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about it. All that time that she was picking up all this stuff off the streets, she was cleaning it at home.
Wow.
Whatever was good, she would keep. Whatever was not good, she would throw away. And she was putting it in boxes. And she was funding a shelter.
Wow.
And the lady that called my mom was the director of the shelter. And when she found out that my grandmother had passed away, she told the people from the shelter, you know, one of our main providers has passed away.
Wow.
And they said, "What can we do?" And they're like, "Well, there's not much we can do, but you know, we can reach out to the family."
Yeah.
And when my grandmother my mom shared that story with me, man, I was like, "So all that time that you guys were yelling at her, it's because she was still sending stuff to DR, and she just didn't know that she was picking up garbage from the street because she just thought that she was doing a good thing."
Yeah.
So my grandmother never stopped, you know, and she did that philanthropy stuff for so long. And you know, I took so much pride when I was able to, like, you know, confront my friend in a nice way. And I said, "You know, you remember that, you know, that one time that you made fun of me because I had put philanthropy on my bio and you told me to take it down? Well, I did some research on philanthropy, and philanthropy starts all the way from the ancient times, you know, back in the churches. And when he looked it up, he was like, "Oh man, I apologize."
Wow.
You know, and I didn't do it like as an ego move, a boss move, or whatever, but education is the most important thing.
Absolutely.
And educating people, there's never an ending to that.
Oh my
and
goodness.
there's so much misinformation out there. There's so much stuff that folks are not educated about. And folks are not educated enough because there's just so much information out there. And I think, Cornelius, that when folks are educated with the right information,
you're so right.
It kind of helps their mindset.
Yeah, you're so right. You know, and just like to hear that story, that's major. You know, like, and this idea, we really have to even reimagine what wealth is, right?
Yeah.
That your grandmother was wealthy.
Yeah.
You know,
Very
like,
wealthy.
and if people have this narrow view that wealth is only cash, then of course you can't be a philanthropist. But then, but when you see that for her, wealth was her creativity, wealth was her ability to see and repurpose things. Wealth was her ability to connect with other people. Wealth was her ability to stay persistent in her pursuit of resourcing other communities. So she has so much wealth.
Yeah. And you know, I always questioned, like, precisely like my family. I would be like, "Guys, she was born in like the the early 1900s.
Wow.
How did she have the resources? Like, there was money was a thing, but
Yeah.
like, that physical cash that we see now,
Yeah.
that didn't
No,
exist.
I mean, but the resources were her creativity,
Yeah,
right?
and-
It's that old saying, like, how do I turn $1,
Yeah.
make $1 out of 15
yeah,
cents?
and the value was
Yeah, I can-
nothing back in the day compared
Exactly.
to what it is now. So I was
Yeah.
like, how is she making of things? Like when she passed away, her will alone, I was so shocked. And I was like, how? I
Yeah.
mean, I know she worked
People
until she
were-
was like in her 80s
Yeah.
because my family stopped her from working once they realized she was getting senile. But I was like, how?
No, it's
And like, when she
creativity.
passed away, everything was taken care of. There was no GoFundMe. There was no nothing. She had paid for everything in advance.
Yeah.
And that's what like had me in awe because I was like, we don't know if when we pass away, we'll have,
Yeah.
we don't have to, burden our family members with like, oh, you got to take care of my, expenses. Like her expenses were taken care of and they were taken care of for years.
Yeah.
I remember as a child, she would always say to me, my tombstone is paid for, and I was always like, what are you talking about? I was like,
Wow.
your tombstone? And I'm like, and the thing is, she was planning ahead. And that was one of the things about my grandmother. My grandmother always had that dynamic mindsetting of planning ahead.
Yeah.
And she tried to teach that to her kids
Mm-hmm.
and everybody else. She definitely taught it to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized
That's
over
beautiful.
the years how when I became a businessman, how good I was with strategy.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
that's
I
your
was like,
grandmother speaking.
yeah,
I mean, the ancestors still talk to us.
Yeah.
Like
they definitely do.
Yeah,
They definitely do.
That's your grandmother speaking.
So,
That's beautiful.
I wanted to talk about resilience, growth, and Black history.
Mhm.
Since it's Black History Month,
Yeah.
who is a historical figure that embodies dynamic resilience to you
Oh my gosh.
and why?
So many. And I mean, and like we were just talking about, the ancestors really speak to us. Like on a given day, depending on what I need, that's who I turn to. So there are some days where I need to be creative like your grandmother. So I'll turn to Fannie Lou Hamer, the great activist. Or there are some days where I need to be thoughtful. So I'll turn to James Baldwin, right? The great writer and thinker. Or there are some days where I need to be, just really like purposeful and driven. So I'll turn to Frederick Douglass, right? And so there are so many, when I think about kind of Black history, it's not just like a singular person or moment or movement for me. I really, really think about like, how can I, like you with your grandmother, or like many folks with, the books that they read, how can I like study a person and walk a little bit closer toward the legacy that person left for me? And so right now, I'm thinking a lot about family and what that means. And, like you said, families often face so many challenges.
Yes.
And so as my own kids mature, as I like really grow in my understanding of what it means to be a father, what it means to be a good partner to my wife, I'm really looking at all of the Black folks, both like known and unknown, who have shepherded families through difficult times, who have shepherded families into joy. And so I think about folks like, my own father, or I think about folks, you mentioned the church that like I went to church with, so powerful mothers who really held up the church, or powerful fathers or uncles who really held up the neighborhood. And so I think about, yes, these are all the big name people that we know, but it's the Mr. Joneses of the world who held up the neighborhood, or, the Miss Boldens of the world who taught the Sunday school and gave oranges to the kids so that we wouldn't be hungry in the summer. So I think about those folks as well. And so it's just been really, really powerful for me to kind of pause in this February and think about Black history, and to think about global Blackness, right? That you talk about like your grandmother and her service to people on the island, and she would go to the border, and so like Blackness isn't just limited to these yet to be United States, right? That when we think about global Blackness and all that people have done to hold up, to preserve, to defend Blackness around this country, around this world, that's really exciting for me. And then I think about, I'm a big nerd, right? And so I think about kind of like this idea of Afrofuturism. So I think about Blackness beyond this globe, Mae Jemison, right? One of the first, people in space, and so I think about just like, there's so much richness that we can like, think about when we think about Black history. And I think that I hope at least that people are thinking beyond the month of February, because, anything that Black folks touch is Black history. Right. And so, thinking about the Super Bowl and Serena Williams in the halftime show, right? Like tennis is Black, thinking about, again, I just mentioned Mae Jemison, space is Black, right? I think about all of the places that Black folks show up and create beauty. What a month to celebrate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Speaking about that, your work focuses on equity in education. How can we teach resilience through Black history in a way that empowers students?
Wow. And again, I think when I think about equity, right, and that's a term that is highly contested right now, but when I think about equity right now and ensuring that experiences and outcomes in this country in any venue, whether it be school, housing, anything, to ensure that like people get what they need in order to thrive, that there's so much in this country specifically that has been designed so that some people get less and other people get more. And so when we look at the history of this country, right, simple things like redlining, right, this practice of only extending home loans to certain people and not extending home loans to other people. So for generations, banks and communities practice this, right? So we're only going to extend home loans to white folks and not extend home loans to Black folks. And so after generations of that, when you look at how families inherit wealth, like most families, wealth is in the home, in the equity of the home, or wealth is in, the community that they live in. And so to understand that whole groups of people were systemically locked out of access to that wealth, and then to look at those people today and to say, well, y'all don't work hard enough. Well, I always talk to people when I'm talking about equity, this idea of equity, is almost like a Monopoly game, right? Where some groups of people were allowed to start the game and play and circle the board several times and accumulate wealth. And some groups of people were only allowed to start the game last generation, right? And so to look at all of those people who were playing the game and say, well, you're a horrible player because you don't have money, you don't have homes. But then to step back and look at the laws to say, well, I couldn't even start the game until a generation ago, right? And so when I think about equity in school, right, that certain groups of people weren't allowed to start the game until one generation ago, two generations ago. Certain groups of people weren't allowed access to certain classes or certain opportunities. Certain groups of people had their schools closed, right? And so so when I think about this moment and the resilience required, I'm often thinking not just how do people speak out, that's important, but I'm also thinking how do people identify areas where things need to change and be about the work of changing those things. And that work requires a lot of resilience, and I hope to create a world where one day that work doesn't require as much resilience. And so the work of identifying what are the systems that work for people, what are the systems that work against people, and how can I amplify those systems that work for people? That's incredible resilience. A story that I often tell, I've been thinking about it a lot. I'm working with a group of young people, and they identified correctly, this is a group of kids, probably about 12 kids, and 8 of the kids take care of younger siblings in the morning. And so they get up in the morning, their parents go to work early. One young man in particular, his father works for sanitation, and so his father is at work at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
And so he wakes up at 5:30 in the morning and gets his 2 younger siblings dressed, gets them fed, and then walks them to school personally before he walks to middle school. And he's late to school every day because the elementary school starts at 8:20. The middle school starts at 8:25. So he drops his kids off, his younger siblings off at 8:20, and then he has to walk a few more blocks to get to the middle school. So he usually gets to school at about 8:37, 8:30, but school starts for us at 8:25. And so he's late every day. And when he was late every day, he kept getting detention. And if you get too many detentions, that's a suspension, right? So he's getting these detentions, and his friends sat with him. So it's about 12 kids, and they sat. And they were like, this punishment that you're getting isn't fair.
Yeah.
Your father works for sanitation. He's gone at 4 a.m. You're waking up, you're cooking food for 2 younger siblings, you're getting them dressed, you're making sure their faces are clean, their teeth are brushed, you're walking them to school, and then you get to school and you get punished. You know, and they're like, and then the teachers were like, yeah, he's late, so he's not responsible. He needs to be more responsible. He's being late every day. Meanwhile, that kid is probably the most responsible kid in the school, right? And so his friends realized this and they got together and they were like, how can we support you? You know, and they were like, well, maybe we can, you know, help you get your siblings ready. Maybe we can stand on the corner to make sure that they get to school while you can rush, you know, and make it to middle school on time. And to watch that young man and his friends think about it, and he was like, actually, the best way to support me is to advocate that we change these rules. Because no matter how much I rush, the rules as they stand are always going to say that I'm late and that I'm irresponsible. Meanwhile, I'm doing every responsible thing in the morning before most people even get up, and I'm 12, right? And so his friends, like, they got together and they advocated for him, and they advocated, you know, could we see a relaxation of the rules around being late? You know, that if you're late because you're just hanging out on the corner, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But if you're late because you're really striving to make sure that your siblings have everything they need in the morning, that shouldn't be met with the same response as the person who's just hanging out in the corner, right? And so watching his friends advocate for him, that advocacy is resilience, right?
Yeah.
But then it's addressing the root cause, right? To say that, like, we can make school a more hospitable and welcoming place for our friends if we seek to understand exactly why people get here at 8:27 and not 8:25, you know? And so I'm really inspired by what kids are doing, not just to speak out, but to really change things so that we can all have more powerful communities. Because you want a kid like that in your community, a kid who knows how to care for their younger siblings, a kid who knows how to take responsibility in their family, help out their father. You know, his father goes to work early in the morning, so he knows how to help out around the house. You want a kid like that in your community. You don't want to punish that kid and call that kid irresponsible because they're at school 2 minutes late. But far too many systems don't see the whole child, right? There are far too many schools, there are far too many communities, there are far too many organizations and institutions that want to look and nitpick about certain things, but don't want to step back and be like, well, let's look at the whole kid. Why is this kid walking into school every day at 8:27? What can we as an institution do to support this kid instead of just being like, well, you're 2 minutes late, we're going to punish you without asking questions, right? You know, and so I am very, very encouraged by this generation. I think that they are better than we ever were. You know, seeing how they come together, how they communicate, how they support each other has just been so inspiring to me. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I really do. You know, Cornelius is not just an educator. You know, Cornelius is also, you know, all some of the things I briefly mentioned. He also is the founder of Cass and Corn, one of the co-founders of Cass and Corn, also one of the founders of the Minor Collective. And you know, when I first met Cornelius, that first conversation that we had, Cornelius ended up giving me this book right here. You got this, and you know, I have it here for a reason, because it's just to show you how much respect I have for you and how much I admire everything that you do. I also know that you're a wrestling fan. That's one of the reasons why we connected.
Yes.
And I see right here in the front, we have the New Day, which is one of the most influential stables that the WWE had over the years. I don't like the direction of the New Day right now. Hopefully there's some type of plot twist. But, you know, when Xavier Woods, Kofi Kingston, and Big E got together, they formed a very great stable. And, you know, they came out with the Bootios, the cereal, the pancakes, and all this stuff. But, you know, the power of positivity. So I wanted to ask you, what drew you to WWE, and how do you see resilience reflected in professional wrestling?
Yeah, you know, what's interesting is, you know, I'm not necessarily a WWE fan, but I am a fan of powerful storytelling.
Okay.
Wherever we can find it.
Okay.
Right. And so I guess the thing that drew me to WWE was watching specifically these three gentlemen tell some of the most compelling stories that I've seen in any medium. So to turn on my television on a Monday or Friday and see Kofi overcoming odds in Kofi Mania, right? To turn on my television and to see the respect and love showered on Big E, to turn on my television and to see Xavier Woods' creativity, right? I couldn't help but to want to share that with my children, right? To turn on the TV and be like, look at this guy playing a trombone and entertaining thousands, right? In this medium that historically has not allowed for that kind of self-expression, right? Look at a guy like Big E with his size and his strength exhibiting sensitivity and thoughtfulness in this medium that has not always been known for sensitivity that comes in a body that looks like his and moves like his, right? To watch these three gentlemen, to be like, here are three Black men on television who are telling stories that highlight positivity, that highlight being dynamic, that highlight sensitivity, was an absolute thrill for me. As a father, that's what I want to show my kids, right? I remember when WrestleMania came to New York and there were all these festivities around, to have my kids out, we all got t-shirts and things like that. Or when SummerSlam came to Brooklyn, where I live, right, to Barclays Center, to be outside and to be in that energy is one thing. And people are like, oh, you take your kids to pro wrestling or you all watch pro wrestling. Nah, my kids watch Xavier Woods, my kids watch Kofi Kingston, my kids watch Big E. But then to watch those three and to see how their characters interacted with other characters in that medium. And then to watch every week with my kids and to watch my girls discover Bianca Belair, to watch my girls discover the Street Profits, to watch my girl. And so to see all of these intersecting stories where powerful, creative, thoughtful, sensitive Black people are showing up on our TV screen every week and doing these sometimes superhuman things. I'm a really big believer that it's important to dream, and it's also important to see how dreams manifest when we put work and thought and creativity behind it. And so every week to turn on the TV and to see Bianca is to see creativity and love and hard work made manifest. Right? To turn on the TV every week and to see a Montez Ford or to see a Kofi Kingston is to see work and dedication and hard work made manifest. And that's the world I want my kids to grow up in, be it sports entertainment or anything, right? Because to see Big E in this medium, but then to see Basquiat in another medium is the same energy, right? To see Kofi Kingston in this medium, but then to see Toni Morrison in another medium is the same energy, right? It's the same creativity, it's the same love for community, it's the same excitement. And so, I'm always wanting to be in conversation with young people. I'm always wanting to be in conversation with my peers around what's best for our communities. And so to be able to kind of put the world down, to put everything down, and to just be entertained by people who are doing extraordinary things, again, that's what drew me to the medium.
I love that.
Yeah.
A lot. You spoke a lot about Black excellence.
Yeah.
So, in regards to wrestling, like life, it's all about overcoming setbacks. What advice would you give to someone who is facing setbacks and trying to push forward?
One thing that I'm learning right now is that I am as important to my community as my community is to me. That I grew up in a household, in a community that always tried to embrace me, even though I tried to do things alone. That sometimes my initial impulse is to do things alone, especially when I'm struggling. And I've had to continue to remind myself that I have a community that I can lean on. And so if there was somebody out there who was struggling, if there was somebody out there who's going through hard times, I want to remind those folks that you don't have to do it alone, right? Sometimes we watch the movies, sometimes we read comic books and folks do things alone. But I want to remind folks that, again, community matters.
It does.
And in every moment when I found myself at my lowest, the pronoun is not I, it's we, right? That there are people around me who can support me. And so just practicing that has been critical for me. And if there were anybody else going through something right now, I would want to remind them that they have community. And community is not limited to geography, right? We live in the 21st century now.
Yes.
So sometimes community is a text to a friend across the country. Sometimes community is somebody responding to a post and reminding me that I matter, right? And so I think that that's the thing that I would offer right now, community.
Sounds good. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, Cornelius, I wanted to ask you, what's a personal mantra or lesson that keeps you grounded when facing challenges?
Whew, there's so many of them. And at this point in life, the challenges that I face are multiple. Like I'm a father, I'm an educator, I'm attempt to be like engaged in community, and I think I'm blessed to be in so many spaces where I get to encounter so many different kinds of challenges.
Yes.
And I'm really trying to see it that way, that this idea that to whom much is given, much is expected,
Hmm.
right? And I have been really, really lucky in my life. And so that I've been able to kind of take that good fortune and really kind of think about, okay, how am I showing up in spaces where I can use all that I've been given to think creatively, to solve problems. And so a mantra, if I were to give a mantra, again, it goes back to the power of the collective. For me, like one word that I often chant to myself when things feel hard is I just say we. That I turn, I look to my friends, or I look at my family, or I look at my neighbors, and I just remind myself that I'm not in this alone. I borrowed that from Muhammad Ali. He always talked about like that he's like, even though I'm the one in the ring, there's a whole team
Yes.
of people who have helped me to be here. And so I never want to forget the power of we. So,
I love that.
yeah.
Two more questions.
Yeah.
But this question I like to ask people a lot. Cornelius, what was the most resilient moment of your life?
Hmm. Whew.
Time in your life where you felt like you was the most resilient?
There's been a lot. Um, there's been a whole lot, and I guess this is recency bias, right? If I really, there's so many moments. I think for me, it's the smaller moments. Um, I think the effort required to show up powerfully every day. That we all have mornings where you get up and you're not really feeling going to work.
Mm.
Or we all have mornings where you get up and you're like, I just don't want to make breakfast for the kids this morning, right? We all have these mornings where you get up and you're just like, walking to the subway is too cold outside. Let me just call in today. Like there are all these moments. And so when folks often think of resilience, they often think about the big moments, right? Like the huge life moments. I think about the smaller, more mundane moments, that there are so many mornings where I have to call friends to stay encouraged or remind myself that like just put one foot in front of the other. And so even, gosh, yesterday was Monday, right? We're shooting this podcast on a Tuesday. Yesterday was Monday. And just reminding myself yesterday that, I don't have to, knock out the whole Monday, but, let me leave the house and just put one foot in front of the other, right? And the rest of Monday will come. And then being able to share that energy with kids, because so much of my existence isn't just getting myself out the door, or getting myself into the classroom and through a book. But like at any given moment, there are 29 to 32 kids that I've got to usher through an experience. And so it's like getting my own energy up, and then helping other kids. And so there's a specific moment that I can remember. This was a while ago. This was early in my teaching career. This is spring 2005.
Okay.
And my class, they were taking a math test, and a lot of kids have a lot of math anxiety. They're great at math when
Yeah.
we're talking about it, or when we're doing it on the board, or we're using crayons and art supplies to bring math to life, or we're building math into structures and projects. They're great at math, they're very expressive. But some kids, when they sit and take a test, they get really anxious. And as their teacher, because I love them, I feel that, right? And so that energy is in the room. And I remember there was this one kid, we're all getting ready for our math test, and this one kid, right before the test was supposed to begin, his pencil broke. And he was already anxious about the test. And so then for his pencil to break right before the test, like that just kind of sent him over the edge. And because we all love him and his friends were caring about him and worried about him, I'm his teacher, I'm worried about him, it just kind of set the whole class off. So like that one pencil breaking just was the one thing that set there were probably 32 of us in the room at that time, and it just set us all off. And I remember really feeling his anxiety, like just like the empathy. Like I understood, like I know what it's like to be 12 years old, and to be stressed out about a test. And I'm getting emotional. His friends are getting emotional. It's like we're all in it together. And I just remember having to like breathe deep. And I'm like, all right, Cornelius, you got to put one foot in front of the other, because the next decision you make is going to dictate the energy in this classroom.
Yeah.
And so like, you have to get it together because they need you
Exactly
to get it together. And so I remember even telling the class, I was like, yo, I'm not feeling great right now. Like this is worrying to me too. But even though I'm not feeling great, I know that we've studied everything that we need to study.
Yeah.
I know that we're brilliant. I know that we're thoughtful. I know that we're creative. So even though we're feeling kind of funny right now, I also know that we can do this. And like, I think that was one of the first times in my life where I was not just responsible for myself. I had to carry like a whole group of people with me. And so even though it doesn't sound like a big moment, like watching that kid break his pencil and just watching like the tears, and I'm like, all right, how do I lift him up?
Yeah.
And then like all his friends were concerned about him, and how do I get all of us like across the finish line? You know, like that was like a real moment for me. Yeah.
You know, my pencil broke a lot in the past, but you know, one step at a time, one day at a time.
Yeah.
You know, Cornelius, ever since I met you, you know, like I mentioned before, you gave me this book. I remember for Christmas time, I gave you a Notorious B.I.G. Funko Pop as your Christmas gift. But, you know, I like to give, you know, my love language is gifting. So I want to share a gift with you that I have for you. So if you don't mind giving me this gift, and, you know, I'm coming up to my final question. Cornelius is one of the most resilient people that I've known, and thank you. And Cornelius, you know, I know that you mentioned to me in a personal conversation that we had that this might be the last year of you cycling, and you know, you want to pass the torch to the younger generation. So I wanted to give you something that you can possibly wear one day when you're cycling. So this is a gift to you.
Oh my gosh.
From the Resilient Podcast. It's one of our official resilience
incredible
jackets. Yeah.
Nice. Oh, I'm gonna definitely wear this.
Yeah.
Definitely wear this. And everybody gonna see it. They're gonna be like, oh.
And this is how it all started.
Yeah.
So, you know, finally, Cornelius, I ask this question on every single episode. What is your message to the world, and why?
My message to the world, stay in it, man. Stay engaged. Like there is so much right now that needs us to be incredible, that needs us to be powerful, that needs us to be thoughtful, that needs us to be our best. And I think there's one of the things that I'm learning right now is that there are some mornings I get up and I don't feel incredible. There are some mornings that I get up and I'm not at my best. But that doesn't mean that I can't stay in it, right? You know, and that's a message that I always remind kids, that even on the mornings where I do not feel like the best in the world, like I'm still creative, I'm still thoughtful, like I'm still powerful. And so I show up as I am and I stay with it, right? You know, and so if I were to leave anything with anybody, you know, none of us are 100% all the time. But I've really just kind of adopted this belief and this energy that I'm going to stay in it, you know? And, you know, some people shorten that, you know, John Cena, don't give up, you know, like, but
One
like
of my favorite quotes.
Yeah. But I really, really do believe that if you show up and you stay in it, like good things happen. You know, and so that's a thing, you know, that I'm always thinking about, like, okay, if things aren't going my way, how do I still show up and exercise some creativity so that things will go my way? So that'd be a message that I leave with the world. Just stay in it, you know, and it's hard, you know, that I'm learning that firsthand as a father, as a community member. And so just wanting to put that one foot in front of the other, that like sometimes I can see the destination, but the path is unclear to me. But I can take the next step. And so for me, it's always just doing the next right thing. And that's proven to be incredibly challenging, but also incredibly rewarding.
I appreciate that. You know, that's exactly how I feel. But, you know, I commend you on all of that stuff, because I personally feel that you are a great parent, a great husband, a great educator. And I appreciate you for that.
Thank you.
You know, so Cornelius, thanks so much
Oh
for
my
your
gosh,
time.
yeah, this is exciting.
Cornelius, where can people find you?
Oh man, you can find me. So the easiest place is online, Cass and Corn, KASSANDCORN.com. Cass and I have an event coming up pretty soon with our friend and fellow author Kwame Alexander, where we're going to be doing some action dreaming together. So if you check Cass and Corn website or any of our social media, so Instagram, the Minor Collective, there are sign up links there.
Yes.
And you know, I'm back with my pen, so there's hopefully some writing coming soon.
I hope so.
Yeah, you know, so yeah, just like stay engaged, you know, with Rob through the podcast, stay engaged with Cass and I through cassandcorn.com, stay engaged in your communities. Like I think that we need each other right now, and this is a powerful time to be connected.
Great.
Yeah.
So there's a link right here. Well, you'll see
Yeah.
cassandcorn.com. And folks, you know, thanks for tuning in for episode 23 with Cornelius, where we talked about dynamic. You know, follow us at The Resilient Pod on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Follow us also on the Resilience Tribune, which is a publishing platform, which Cornelius, hopefully someday I can have a story from you. ResilienceTribune.com. Once again, I'm Rob Aurelius. On behalf of Cornelius Minor, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
I appreciate you all, and happy Black History Month. Remember, folks, to stay resilient and be blessed. Peace.